Today we're going to be talking about organizational structure. And to remind you of the context of all of this, the reason that we care about organizational structure is that we are trying to structure our organization in such a way as to accomplish our strategy. So going back to Porter's four generic strategies of cost leadership, cost focus, differentiation, broad differentiation, and focus differentiation. Our structure is designed to facilitate our strategy. What is our strategy designed to do? It's designed to cope with the five forces that exist within our industry. And why are we trying to cope with the five forces? So that we can maximize ROI. So you can understand the context within which all of this is taking place. We're trying to structure our organization to accomplish our strategy, to deal with the five forces to maximize ROI. And maximizing ROI, that's the North Star in business. That's what we're always trying to accomplish. Organizational structure answers two basic questions. Who does what work and who makes decisions? In regard to who does what work, there are two aspects of this. There's specialization and formalization. And in regard to who makes decisions, there are three aspects of this. Centralization, chain of command, and span of control. And we'll be talking about these five aspects of organizational structure today. We'll start out by talking about specialization. Work specialization is the process of grouping tasks into jobs. In fact, the word job comes from a word that means lump. So a job is when you lump together a certain set of tasks. Now imagine it's 200 or 300 years ago and you wanted a sweater. What's the first thing you would do? Well, you'd have to start raising some sheep. And then when the sheep were grown, you could shear them, and then you would spin that wool into yarn. And then you would knit the yarn into a sweater, and then you got your sweater, and you'd be the one who wore it. And it was basically one person or a family, just a handful of people that would be involved in the entire process from beginning to end. Nowadays, to make a sweater, we split this task of making a sweater up. We split it up into little subtasks. So there's separate organizations for each of these functions, right? There's a company that raises the sheep, a company that shears the sheep, a company that spins the wool into yarn, a company that knits the yarn into sweaters, and then there's a company that doesn't do anything except sell the sweaters. So this is what we mean by specialization. We've taken the task, broken it down into its constituent parts, and then we're specializing in one task in the process. We also go a step further, and we don't just specialize based on companies, we specialize within companies as well. So if we look at the company that's responsible for knitting the sweater, there's the people that actually do the knitting, but they're not the whole company. There are people in the finance and accounting department that never even touch yarn. They're responsible for paying the bills, making sure that money coming in is more than money coming out, keeping the lights on at the end of the month. And then there's a marketing department, which is responsible for, selling their sweaters, touting how great their sweaters are and selling them to people. So not only do we have specialization between companies, but we actually have specialization within companies. Now, what's really interesting is that because we have this work specialization, we have people actually knitting the sweaters, we have the people in finance, we have the people in marketing. Now we need another person to coordinate the work between all of these people, and that's management, of course. And we so take it for granted that a boss is just a normal part of our everyday lives, but that is relatively new in the history of work. When we had one person making a sweater from beginning to end, you didn't need a manager coordinating that work. You had like a feudal lord you had to pay taxes to at the end of the year or whatever, but he wasn't there making sure you start farming at the right time every morning, making sure you're using the right plow. People were fairly autonomous with their work. Now with specialization, we need managers to coordinate putting all of that work together. And management is a relatively new idea in the history of work. It's something that's really only existed since the Industrial Revolution 200 or 300 years ago. I mean, there was certainly management before that, but the ubiquity in our lives of management is a very new thing. So high specialization is when each job consists of a narrow set of tasks. And the perfect example of this is an assembly line where you take something like building a car and you break it up into 1,000 different tasks, and each person does one of those tasks, like screwing in a screw. A person will just sit there and they'll screw in the same screw all day, every day. That is specialization. You're doing the same task over and over again. Low specialization is when each job consists of a broad set of tasks. Being a professor is a job with low specialization, so I do a diverse variety of tasks on a day-to-day basis. I'm sitting here recording a lecture in my living room right now. I had to make the PowerPoint. I had to read and outline research articles to make the lecture. I write academic articles. I read academic articles. I work with students, face to face in office hours, give them feedback. So day to day, my work is incredibly diverse, and that is low specialization. I'm not just doing one task over and over and over again. I'm doing a variety of tasks throughout the day. It is hard to exaggerate the extent to which specialization revolutionized work. And one way of kind of putting this into context is the fact that we don't even think of specialization as a thing. Like, it doesn't occur to us that someone had to have the idea of specialization. We just see it as a natural, logical way to organize work. I sometimes have this weird fantasy as I'm drifting off to sleep that I wake up in the morning and it's 500 years in the past. And, I'm in medieval Europe and there's all these angry villagers who want to burn me at the stake. And I have to prove to them some sort of value. I have to use my knowledge of the future to wow them in some way. And, I don't know how to build an iPhone. I don't know how to make the internet. I can't make a car. Like, I don't have a lot of good technical skills. We often don't think of the idea, oh, we could teach them specialization, but that is something very valuable that you could contribute to people 500 years ago. We think it's just obvious that this is the way work has always been organized, but it's not. That was an idea that revolutionized the way we think of work at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. A perfect example of this is the automobile. So cars used to be these really expensive luxury items because they would be built, each car would individually be built by hand by one person or a small group of people. And they would build one car from scratch, and then they would build another car from scratch. And it would take weeks, and because it took that long, it was really expensive. And Henry Ford's great contribution, the reason that Ford Motor Company became so successful, is he combined the ideas of automobiles and assembly lines. Both of those things existed before him, but he was the first one to put them together. And by doing that, and by breaking the task of building an automobile down into these individual tasks, these repetitive specialized tasks, he was able to exponentially increase how quickly you could manufacture an automobile. And now, instead of taking a week to make a single car, you can make dozens of cars in a single day. Specialization is incredibly efficient. So Adam Smith estimated that if one man were making a pin, he would be lucky to make a single pin in one day. But if you get a group of 10 people together and you break down manufacturing a pin into these individual steps, and you have each of those 10 people doing one of those 10 steps, then together those 10 people can make 50,000 pins in one day. So each of them are making the equivalent of 5,000 pins. So through specialization, we're able to just exponentially increase the efficiency with which we produce or manufacture items. An important caveat, and this connects to kind of some of the limitations of neoliberalism we were talking about earlier, is that for this process to work, you need 50,000 pins. That specialization only leads to these big gains in efficiency when you have huge scale, right? Economies of scale. And if you need just a few of an item, then you don't get nearly the return on efficiency through specialization. And that's one of the reasons that we have things like designed obsolescence, when manufacturers are constantly pushing disposable, consumable items, because for them to make a profit, for them to make it worthwhile, they have to produce just tons and tons and tons of whatever it is that they make. I notice people get confused with the word specialization because we tend to use it in a different way in our day-to-day lives, and I am using it now in this technical way to refer to organizational structure. I have a PhD in industrial organizational psychology. You could say that I am a specialist in industrial organizational psychology, that my specialization is industrial organizational psychology. That's totally accurate. That's how we use that word on a day-to-day basis. That's not how we're using the word in regard to organizational structure. Yes, my specialization is industrial organizational psychology, but as I discussed earlier, my job is actually low specialization. I do a variety of tasks throughout the day. So specialization refers to the tasks that you do. It does not refer to the knowledge associated with your job. There are huge benefits to specialization, which we've already discussed. So efficiency, obviously. Another one is cheap labor. You are always paying your employees for their most valuable skill. So if we're building a car from scratch, putting a transmission together, that's a pretty complicated task. You need someone with a lot of knowledge, skill, and experience to be able to do that. Putting a tire on a car, that is a pretty simple, straightforward task, and you can basically have anyone off the street do that. If one person is building a car, if the same person is assembling the transmission and putting on the tire, I'm paying that person for the knowledge, skills, and abilities to put the transmission together, even when they're putting the tire on. Through specialization, I can have the guy that knows how to do transmissions, I can have him do transmissions all day long, and then the person who's putting on the tires, I can pay them at a much lower rate. The other benefit of specialization is consistency. If each one person is only doing one task over and over and over again, you get really good at doing that task and you get consistency in your products. So there are definitely huge advantages to specialization, but there are also major drawbacks to it. One is that people are more likely to get injured. They get repetitive stress injuries when they're just working on an assembly line doing the same thing all day, every day. The other problem is that it leads to myopia within organizations. When each person is so focused on one incredibly specialized part of the process, then no one or only a few people understand the process as a whole. And because of that, it makes it really difficult to innovate and improve the process because no one's seeing the big picture of how everything comes together. Each person is just focused on their individual contribution. The other major drawback to specialization from a societal perspective and also from an organizational perspective is that specialization can alienate people from work. When you're doing the same thing over and over and over again all day, that gets really monotonous. Also, when you're just working on one small part of something, you often miss how what you do contributes to the whole. And so you feel like you're doing this like meaningless task over and over and over again all day. That leads to problems like absenteeism and turnover. And it just makes people hate their work. From a societal perspective, that's a bad thing. We want people that are happy and that enjoy their work. I want people that are happy and enjoy their work. And specialization really can undermine that.